Hey everybody, so I taught the first round on the Council of Nicaea last Wednesday, and when I went back to get my recording, it did not work right. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of what was in that particular session so that if you missed for whatever reason, you can catch up with where we are. And the first thing is when it happened. So the Council of Nicaea happened in AD 325. So 325 years after Christ was born, we have our first ecumenical council. For if you're not aware of what an ecumenical council is, that's when the church gathers together to figure something out. So there's some sort of controversy, there's some sort of issue that the church needs to figure out and hash out. They call an ecumenical council, where they will invite bishops and pastors and church leaders to come and debate about whatever the topic may be. And the Council of Nicaea is no different. The church leaders are gathered together to determine a controversy. And one of the things that we're going to start off with is, where did it happen? It happened in Iznik, Turkey. So what's really interesting, and some of my sources on this, or one of my sources on this, was Wes Huff's um, video from a few weeks ago about the Council of Nicaea, which was actually a great video. I would recommend looking at it. And he actually went to where the Council of Nicaea happened, and this is where it is. It's actually a church that's underwater now, which is kind of wild. But apparently, this place has a lot of earthquakes and issues when it comes to water. So as you can see, this is where we are pretty sure the Council of Nicaea took place, and all of these pastors and bishops gathered here to debate this. Now, we're going to start off talking about what it wasn't, what it wasn't, what the Council of Nicaea was not. There are all kinds of internet speculations, and there's just like people who want to get on here and tell you, oh, this is what the Council of Nicaea was. There's a bunch of politicians who got together and determined the Bible, determined the canon. It was not. That was not it. And we'll talk about why that wasn't in just a second. They also like to say that they created the theological framework for Christ's divinity, that most of Christians pre-Nicaea did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Again, we'll talk about that and why that's untrue in just a second. And the last one that I think is really almost comical, but it's gotten a lot of steam. So we'll talk about it, that it's combining pagan and Christian doctrine to create a new religion. So the first thing let's go through why we not only don't think, but know the Council of Nicaea was not a gathering to determine the canon. So, when we talk about the canon, if you're not familiar with that term, the canon is actually the collection of the 66 books of the Bible that we consider sacred. The canon is a library. So your Bible is actually a library of a bunch of different documents written by different people over generations. And the way that we got our Bible is actually really fascinating and really just a move of the Holy Spirit. But for whatever reason, in popular culture right now, especially internet culture, there's a lot of people who want to say the canon was determined at the Council of Nicaea. It is a really buzzy thing to say, and it's kind of a bombastic, cool claim, so to speak. But in reality, it just didn't happen that way. As a matter of fact, we've always known it did not happen that way. And we'll talk about some of the reasons we know it didn't happen that way. And we'll start off essentially in like a chronological order, looking at how we actually did come to the acceptance of the New Testament specifically as canon or as sacred text, a sacred library. So in the first century, 0 to 100 AD, we don't necessarily have a list, a canonical list yet, simply because the books were just getting completed. But now what's interesting and actually flies in the face of some of these people who want to dispute or fight about the the Nicaea determining the canon. All 27 books were written. in the first 100 years. So within the lifetime of the people who experienced Christ's physical presence on the earth, all of the books were written in that time frame, period, and were in circulation, which is another important fact, is that all of the 27 books that we have in our current New Testament were written and being circulated amongst churches within that first 100 years. So all of these ideas about secret books and secret books and stuff we are trying to hide, it's just not true. Like, it's just not true. All of them were written, all of them were copied and shared, and very much public as far as these particular texts were. The unofficial list that most people considered sacred, especially in the 0 to 100 marker, were the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were written, they were out there, people knew them, people were reading them, considered them sacred, and were divine revelation as far as they were concerned. The four Gospels existed. All of the Pauline epistles, Romans to Philemon, were all already out there and being circulated amongst the churches. The book of Acts, First Peter, and First John, again, all already out there, all commonly accepted as sacred texts. We'll move on to 101 to 200 AD. Things start getting a little bit more official in this time frame. And one of the reasons that happens is because of a guy named Marcion. Marcion was, so I guess, a Christian at some point, but Marcion in AD 140, so 40 years in, he mutilates the text of Luke. Now, his whole goal is he's essentially an anti-Semite, so he's trying to erase the Jewishness of the text. So he rejects the entire Old Testament, just full stop. No room for the Old Testament. But he then goes through the book of Luke. He rejects the other three gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John. But within the book of Luke, he goes through and highly edits, I mean, to the point of mutilating the text. Rewrites Luke. He disregards most of the other stuff, most of the other Pauline epistles, pretty much anything that doesn't reinforce what he believes and what he wants to teach. He just does away with. And people responded. The church responded to Marcion, and they were like, hey, man, you cannot do this. Like, you accept it all or you don't accept any of it, period. So over and over and over, we see in this particular concept is at 140 AD, when Marcion tried to change the text, the church rejected him. They did not rewrite the text. They did not look at a new list for the canon because of Marcion. They wholesale rejected Marcion because of his rejection of the text. So the text was, while it might not have been formalized in a specific list or in as far as like, like our Bible, like we have a book now. They didn't necessarily have that. They had scrolls and letters and things like that they had aggregated in their sacred places. But Marcion rejecting that really had them take a stand and saying, no, you cannot reject the other texts. And Irenaeus comes along in AD 180, so 40-ish years after Marcion. And he affirms most of what we would call the New Testament today. As a matter of fact, he explicitly affirms most of the New Testament as we know it today in AD 180. He says, the four Gospels, no more, no less. So that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So we got the Synoptics and then John. He explicitly affirms them. He explicitly affirms Acts. Nearly all of the Pauline epistles he affirms. The book of Revelation and several of the general epistles he also affirms. He explicitly uses, so in his teaching, preaching, his theology, he is referencing and using Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Hebrews, James, 1st Peter, 1st and 2nd John, Revelation. He doesn't name, but he also doesn't reject the book of Philemon, Jude, 2nd Peter, or 3rd John. Pretty much most of the New Testament as we know it in the modern context, he's already affirmed and said, "Hey, these are the sacred books that we are using," and this is in AD 180, a full 140 years before Nicaea. Now, what is also interesting about Irenaeus, and also kind of flies in the face of what the people of the conspiracy theorists about the Nicene conference want to talk about, is he wholeheartedly and full stop rejects the Gnostic Gospels and the Gnostic texts. So, one thing to talk about on the front end with Gnostic texts is they use kind of an old world idea of trying to they slap people's names on stuff they write to try to legitimize them. So, like for instance, the Gospel of Judas, which is something he addresses explicitly in his writings. Judas did not write the Gospel of Judas. Like, there's no possible way Judas wrote the Gospel of Judas. But he full scale rejects Gnostic texts in general. We see that with a lot of the Gnostic texts, as they just grab an apostle's name and slap it on the front of it to try to act like they wrote it. They did not. We know that they did not because of archaeology, but also like the recorded use of language and the types of languages that these Gnostic Gospels are written in, it doesn't work. As a matter of fact, with the Gospel of Thomas, like the language the Gospel of Thomas is written in didn't even exist when it should have for Thomas to have written it. But back to Irenaeus. He explicitly rejects the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Judas. He calls it a fictitious history. So basically, he's saying Gospel of Judas, not only do we reject it, it's not even real. Like, it's a fake book. It's not even real. Sorry, the writings are not real. It is an actual document. Like, the Gospel of Judas is a thing, but it's fake. It's not a true story. He rejects the gospel of truth. He says that it's not even a narrative gospel. So I don't know why we're even talking about this, but it's not a narrative gospel, which also the gospel of Thomas, just interestingly, is not a narrative gospel either. But the gospel of truth is directly addressed by Irenaeus. It's not a narrative gospel, and salvation was a secret. So again, Irenaeus is directly addressing Gnosticism. In Gnosticism, one of its marquee beliefs is their salvation as some sort of like esoteric, it's like a secret knowledge that you get and that you can make or something along those lines. Long story short, Irenaeus says no. We reject Gnosticism. The gospel was very clear that Jesus revealed himself. He was open. He revealed himself to everyone. He was honest. There is no secret. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Period. Anything that like tries to hide the ball when it comes to salvation, we reject. So Gnosticism wholesale is rejected, but specifically the gospel of truth is rejected because it is trying to be an esoteric type salvation. Now, the Gospel of Thomas, which I've mentioned a couple of times, is not directly addressed by Irenaeus. Neither is like the Gospel of Mary and a few others that are out there floating around these days. But he does roll into basically he gives like a rubric of like, hey, these are things that we don't do these things. And like I was saying a minute ago, any type of esoteric salvation, he rejects a lot of the stuff as far as timing. Like the timing isn't right for these people to have written these things, like their appearance, the way they're written. He's like, just the timelines don't match up. It doesn't work. So he rejects a lot of that stuff. But what's really fascinating, and I want to emphasize this about Irenaeus, and especially in this second century, he did not suppress alternative gospels. It's not like he was out there like we should burn all these things. He did not suppress them. He exposed them. He said, "Hey, this is not what they are. They're lying. It's not what it seems." And again, that's really, really important. It's a non-apostolic writing that contradicted the faith Christians were already confessing and or already participating in, confessing and worshiping in. So Irenaeus is very, very, very clear and very aggressive in attacking the Gnostic Gospels in 180. way before the Council of Nicaea. And then between 170 and 200, the Muratorian fragment appears. And again, I'll credit Wes Huff with this. Wes does another video where he talks about this particular thing. The Muratorian fragment is actually the oldest surviving canonical list. So it's literally a document where they have a list of the New Testament writings that they consider canon, that they consider holy. So that's in 170 to 200. Again, 150 years before Nicaea gathers. We're already talking about a set list of books that we consider holy and sacred. Um, on that list, there is some damage, so there's a little bit of ambiguity, but there is pretty solid evidence that we know. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are on it. Acts, Pauline epistles, Jude, First and Second John, Revelation is all on there. Excludes or comments negatively on, so like it's specifically just like Irenaeus, like it's like, hey, here's a good list, here's a list that we're going to reject. It does the same thing. It rejects the Shepherd of Hermas, which is useful but not scripture, is what it says. It rejects explicitly the Gnostic writings. We think it probably happened. This document probably originated in Rome, and it reflects that it's been used excuse me, it's the information on it leads us to believe that it was used like pretty expansively and pretty much a lot of people were using this particular list. So realistically, by the third century, almost all of scripture is set, so the whole concept that the Council of Nicaea was strictly gathered to determine the canon or to even to edit the canon is really it's really shaky ground, because as we can see, like, okay, maybe they did try to exclude some books. Well, we see from Marcion back in 140 AD, the church was very familiar with the books he's trying to exclude, and they reject him. They reject Marcion. So the idea that as those texts have been working through the church more and more and become even more sacred to the worshipers in the faith, to say that all of a sudden in Nicaea they're just going to be like, okay, yeah, sure, we'll reject all those now and we'll be good. That's a pretty big stretch. I don't foresee that you're going to be able to change the whole thing just because you gathered some bishops in Turkey randomly to get the entire church to reject documents that they considered sacred and holy for generations. It's just not likely. It's unreasonable. So first and foremost, they did not gather to set the canon. They did affirm the canon when they were there, a lot like what Irenaeus did. And the Muratorian fragment also alludes to there were other people who were affirming, hey, these are the books we're all working off of. That is probably likely. That is what they were doing. They were affirming the canonical list. They were not creating it. So the whole idea that the politicians gathered together and decided these are the books we're gonna study and we're gonna edit them, it just doesn't make sense. The next thing, the divinity of Christ. This is the other one that gets a lot of play. Everybody says, "Oh, before Nicaea, nobody believed that Jesus was the Son of God. Nobody believed that Jesus was God." And again, archaeology and history and the way that we see the Christian theology develop through the years, it just totally rejects that whole idea that Nicaea came together to decide Jesus was God or Jesus was the second person of the Trinity. First off, the Apostles' Creed, which we date to the initial, initially it was called the Old Roman Creed or the I can't remember the Latin word, but the Roman Creed we date to 125. We're already saying that. We've already agreed upon that as a church that, hey, like the second part of the Apostles' Creed, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. We are already affirming we believe that he is the second part of the Trinity. So the whole idea that we gathered together in 325 to determine that Jesus was divine is just on its face right there is a little bit of a not only a stretch but like a complete fabrication. The second part of that is or excuse me, the second archaeological piece that I would like to point out is the Megiddo mosaic, and it was dated to 230 AD. So again, 90 years before the Council of Nicaea gathered to supposedly create the divinity of Christ. There's an inscription on the floor that says that Jesus is God. So like it is this beautiful tapestry, like mosaic of tiles that someone has made, and like all art. Art says something, so it has a meaning. Well, this actually explicitly says, like in words, that Jesus is God. So again, this place of worship, which we see this in multiple other places of worship, they were designed and created with the focal points of Christ being God and set up to worship Christ as God. This is long before Nicaea, long before. So again, archaeological evidence would point to the people who called themselves Christians, the people who were worshiping in these times, practiced a faith that affirmed and said Jesus was God long before Nicaea. So the idea that this is a novel idea coming from Nicaea, that Christ is all of a sudden the second part of the Trinity, is completely false. Now, we will talk about the divinity of Christ is discussed. That is actually the focal point of Nicaea, but not the idea of creating the divinity of Christ, which is again, that doesn't make any sense as far as history goes, and especially the history of our faith goes. The divinity of Christ was established long before Nicaea. Again, back to just like the canon, where they affirmed the canon, they affirmed the divinity of Christ at Nicaea. And we're going to talk a lot about why Nicaea even happened and why we needed to affirm the divinity of Christ and the canon itself as we move through this particular class. And then the last one is almost not almost, it is a negative evidence that the people of God believe, the Christians before Nicaea believed that Jesus was God. The Alexamenos Graffito, again, this is another, I mean, I hate to say this, like this is another Wes Huff thing. I didn't even know this thing existed until like probably 2 months ago, but it's really, really cool. There's this graffiti they found in a on a Roman temple making fun of another boy. So like these boys were making fun of other boys. I guess we've always been making fun of each other. Um, but it was a very like rude drawing making fun of this boy who says he worshiped Jesus as God. So again, back to the whole idea: the people who followed Jesus, the people who called themselves Christians, believed that Jesus was God long before Nicaea. That's Nicaea did not break new ground there. It was not a whole thing, and that graffiti has been dated to AD 200. Again, 125 years before Nicaea. So as you can see, over and over and over, the idea that Christ was divine and Christ is God's son, Christ is God, is not new to Nicaea. It is a well-established belief it is a well-established doctrine within the Christian church before Nicaea. So there's no way that they gathered together to create the divinity of Christ. That just doesn't make any sense. So the last one we'll talk about is they were merging paganism with Christianity to create basically a whole new faith. There's literally no evidence of this. This is the whole idea of trying to prove, to try to prove like a negative or whatever. There's just no evidence that paganism was getting merged with Christianity. Now, even today, we try to merge things with Christianity. So I'm sure that type of idea was happening as people became believers and they were trying to figure out what faith was. And this really is a outgrowth of Constantine's part within the gathering of the Council of Nicaea. Constantine was a pagan before he became a Christian, and they're trying to say like Constantine was trying to bring his old beliefs into Christianity to create a new one for the empire, essentially. But again, really just not much evidence for this. As a matter of fact, and we'll talk more about this as we move through this lecture, this class. Constantine's influence in the Council of Nicaea, while we don't need to minimize how important of a character he is in Nicaea, his influence in the theology and the philosophy that comes out of it is pretty stinking minimal. As a matter of fact, from the best I have researched and what I have seen, essentially Constantine gives like an opening speech. He calls for everybody to be gathered, which is super important, and we don't need to discount that. But he calls everybody to gather for the Council of Nicaea to determine, or excuse me, to settle an issue, and then he makes an opening speech. And the best I can tell, and I'm trusting people who are much smarter than me and who have much deeper knowledge of the Council of Nicaea than me, that's pretty much it. That's all. That's all Constantine had to do with this thing. Um, so the concept and the idea that Constantine, as the emperor, is in some back room, trying to make sure he's got worship of the sun god and all that stuff going within Christianity, it doesn't really jive. It doesn't really work. So there doesn't seem to be even any merging of paganism at all within the Council of Nicaea. So again, that one is just internet, craziness. So the last thing we're going to talk about is who are our key players in the Council of Nicaea. Now, obviously, there's a lot more people than these three. Okay, so let's just go ahead and acknowledge that right out of the gate. We don't have time to go into the history of everybody who's there, but we do have the key players. First off, obviously Constantine. Constantine's over here on the right in that as the in that statue. He is the emperor of Rome at this time. He has consolidated power from the tetrarchy, I think is what they called it. The four rulers have come together. Constantine is now ruling Rome as the emperor. He is a recent convert. He is making Christianity the Christian, or excuse me, the faith of the empire, and he calls the thing to order. He says, "Hey, we've got some issues that we need to discuss," and he starts bringing people in to talk. So Constantine is an important player in the Council of Nicaea, but beyond his calling of it, and like I said, his speech, that's really about the end of it. While it was really important that he called it, and this is the first one ever, and that's pretty cool. That's about where his influence and he ends in this. The second one is Arius. Arius over here on the left. He is actually the guy. He is actually the guy who they're meeting about. Arius is the reason Nicaea is happening. Arius is a great preacher. He really is. He's a great preacher. He is saying some things that are getting carried throughout the Roman Empire. The story goes that Arius was a phenomenal writer. He wrote stories and he wrote songs, and these songs were getting carried throughout the Roman Empire, which is part of the problem. Is he's preaching some scandalous stuff, and the people are starting to tell him, hey, you've got to stop preaching this, but he never stops. He never quits. So that's why they start to gather, is because of Arius's preaching. So Arius is the reason. He is the fly in the ointment, so to speak. The reason Nicaea happens. And then you have Saint Nicholas, aka Santa Claus, the one we all love, the big man in red right there in the middle. Saint Nicholas is the defender of the faith. He is the defender of Christ in this particular gathering of Council of Nicaea, and we'll talk more and more about him. But what is fascinating about all of these players and this whole idea is that these guys are gathering together to discuss the future of the church, not in the sense of determining new theology and philosophy, not in the sense of creating a new religion, but they are actually going to say, hey, we are going to continue to do what we are going to do, or what we have always done, and we're going to carry on this faith that we inherited. So, why are they gathering? What is happening? If they're not gathering to determine the canon, to determine the divinity of Christ, or to merge paganism with Christianity, why are they gathering? Well, Arius had a saying. Arius's saying was, there was a time when he was not. There was a time when he was not. And he's talking about Jesus Christ. And this statement, there was a time when he was not, caused the entire church to be thrown into a fight, to be quite honest with you. And they gathered together to settle it at the First Ecumenical Council, the Council of Nicaea. So, hey, join us tomorrow. Join us next for our next session, and we'll go through what Arius was teaching, why it was so scandalous, and hopefully get a little bit of a clearer picture of what actually happened at the Council of Nicaea. Hey, thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.